so we're still waiting to be transferred.
Go ahead, Gwen.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. We're just waiting for participants to continue to join. So we'll start in a moment. All right. Oh, still a few more joining, looks like.
Good girl.
Good. All right. Good morning, everybody. My name is Gwen Bridge, and I'm going to be moderating this session of the Ecological Society of America Traditional Ecological Knowledge Section webinar series, which was started last month, and we are on our second session with Ellen Simmons. I'll introduce myself and go through some preliminaries, and then we'll turn it over to Ellen. My name is Gwen Bridge. I'm Cree from Saddle Lake First Nation in Alberta, Canada, and I'm a member of the ESA Tech section. So welcome all, and thanks for joining us. This is going to be really great. In our first session, we had Ione Quigley, Lakota, who opened the series with a prayer and opened it in a good way for the entire year-long series. So we will close the webinar series with Ione when that's over. So we are going to forego the individual prayers for each session as that was done with Ione's opening. I'm currently on the territory of the Sinixt, the Okanagan, the Colville, and the Ktunaxa, and I'm privileged to speak from a town in Canada called New Denver. I will now introduce Ellen, our speaker, and her talk is going to be on Kiʔlawnaʔ, that means grizzly bear in the Okanagan language, alternative ways of knowing Indigenous knowledge systems, complexity sciences, and forestry in the Okanagan, BC, Canada. And I'll share with you Ellen's wonderful bio. Ellen is a PhD candidate at the University of British Columbia, Okanagan in the Department of Earth, Environmental, and Geographic Sciences. She is also an instructor in the Department of Environmental Resources Technology with the Nicola Valley Institute of Technology in Merritt, BC. Previously, she has worked with the Penticton Indian Band as their principal of adult education, as well as a number of years with the Anauken Center and Forex, which is the Forum for Research and Exchange in Natural Resources. Here she was situated in that role of the Indigenous Knowledge Extension Liaison. She has also worked with wildlife-impacted First Nations communities throughout BC, as well as accumulating a diverse range of fieldwork with a focus on habitat restoration for species at risk. She brings forth over 20 years of experience within the environmental conservation sector, offering a unique skill set that communicates the necessity of including Indigenous knowledge alongside Eurocentric approaches in natural resource practices. She holds an MSc in Environmental Sciences and a Bachelor of Sciences in Forestry from UBC Vancouver. She is Swampy Cree, that's from Saskatchewan, and of Polish descent. Additionally, she sits as a board director for the Nature Trust of BC, the Okanagan Similkameen Conservation Alliance, as well as First Nations Council Advisor to the Dean of Forestry at the University. So welcome, Ellen. I would just invite our participants, as they have questions, to drop them in the Q&A tab at the bottom of the Zoom presentation. We hope and encourage questions. We'll have lots of time for questions at the conclusions of Ellen's talk. Now, thank you, Ellen, and welcome, and we're going to enjoy your presentation. Thanks.
Gwen, thank you. Good morning, everyone, and Gwen, thank you for that very nice introduction. And thank you, everyone, for coming on the call to hear a little bit, allowing me to share with you what I've been doing for the last couple of years. So before I get rolling, I've got a PowerPoint to share with you. I do want to thank the Ecological Society of America for this opportunity to speak, and Gwen and James as well for encouraging me to move forward. I also want to acknowledge that I too, the territory that I am on right at the moment, I'm on the unceded Okanagan Nation traditional territory in Penticton, well, just outside of Penticton, British Columbia. I am I'm gonna actually, maybe I'll just get rolling and I'll just post up this little PowerPoint that I have. All right, just to make sure everything works okay. Where did it go? Let's see, my kids get a little bit upset with me because I have so many things on my screen. Okay, what's going on? Sorry, giving it all away. Okay, all right. I'm hoping you can all see. Can you see the screen? Okay, great. Thanks, Gwen. All right, so I'm as Gwen said, I'm going to be talking about Kiʔlawnaʔ, which is grizzly bear in the Okanagan. So as I've mentioned, because I'm sitting on the unceded territory of the Okanagan Nation, I'm going to present to you a little bit of how grizzly looks from the Okanagan perspective. I do also want to acknowledge a little bit more of my position in moving forward here. So as Gwen mentioned, I am grateful to share with you that I am Cree on my maternal side and Polish and Ukraine on my paternal side. But I'm also very grateful too for the parents that raised me. So I was adopted. And so as a result of that, I've been able to, I guess, sort of be reborn into my Indigenous culture and heritage through the Anauken Center, as Gwen had mentioned, on the Penticton Indian Band. And I'm also very fortunate to have worked on the Lower Similkameen Indian Reserve as well. So I'm going to just cut to the chase here and start talking a little bit about where I'm hoping to go in the next couple of years. So keep in mind that this is my research is at the very beginning. We're at the very beginning stages of it all. So I'm just going to move ahead. So I am as Gwen mentioned, a PhD candidate at the University of British Columbia, Okanagan. And where I'm just going to give a little bit of a background of where I'm going to be going with my research. So this whole project was born out of this need to bring some of the academic worlds together to share a little bit of the Indigenous sciences and the Western science systems. So we're going to be looking at contributing to the reconciliation through traditional ecological knowledge and collaborating these two different systems of knowing and ways of knowing. And in doing that, we're going to be using, looking at grizzly bears. So even though as Indigenous knowledge systems, we look very holistically at everything. So in doing all of this, we've had to narrow it down a little bit. And we have chosen grizzly bears because grizzly bears are what we term to be a flagship species or a iconic species or an umbrella species. They require a very large area. So hence, that's why we're looking at the conservation of huckleberry, well, I guess food forage or berry forage and grizzly bears. So you can sort of see the image to the right. That is, as I was mentioning, the unceded territory of the Okanagan Nation. So I'm going to narrow my focus area and research area a little bit down, and I'll explain that as I keep moving forward. Okay, so just a little bit of a background. And so the first half, I've got about 20 slides to share with you all. The first half of this presentation, I'm going to give you a little bit of a background because we're trying to look at two different knowledge sets. Like, we really need to do this together. So we have to rely on the work that has been done from a Eurocentric Western science place, but also we're trying to find a nice my whole world is nice. We're trying to find a respectful place for Indigenous sciences to be embraced. And I'll talk a little bit more about that and, some of the challenges that we've come up with when we're talking about Indigenous knowledge. So Kiʔlawnaʔ is the Insiilchen name for grizzly bear, and its presence in the Syilx territory is an indicator. Now, this was stated by Grand Chief Stuart Phillip, and you're gonna keep me on track because sometimes I get talking and I get lost in myself. So it is an indicator of the health of the Syilx land and the people. Grizzly bears are also recognized from a Western, and I'm also going to be using, instead of just Western, I'll be using settler science. Because really, what is Western anyhow? So I'm gonna probably just sort of shift over into saying it's a settler science. So grizzly bears are also recognized as a significant focal species from a settler or Eurocentric science place of being. They sort of say that for the overall health, for strategic planning, they're often really good to look at. In Canada, federally, they are a species of special concern, and provincially, we still need to sort of get into action with our species at risk law here in the province. But anyhow, they're recognized as being vulnerable or uncertain. There is a lot of work going on with Conservation Northwest and in their Cascade Grizzly program. But anyhow, keep in mind, I'm going to be probably speaking, well, I am going to be speaking, cut to the chase, Ellen. I am going to be speaking from a Canadian perspective and how this is going to roll out, but cognizant of the work that is going on in the partnerships, because grizzlies, they don't know that border. So the objectives of my research, and if you can just bear with me, I'm kind of getting cut off a little bit just to make sure I've got everything going. So as I said, it's going to be looking at a process that will effectively, and keeping in mind very respectfully and ethically, apply Indigenous knowledge systems and settler knowledge systems in BC's forested landscapes. And we're going to be looking at the southern interior, and we're going to be looking at specific grizzly bear habitat requirements. So forest decision making, at least here in British Columbia, is predominantly informed by a scientific worldview. And this is sort of looking when we're sort of forecasting how much timber do we have, how can we move ahead, think about the economics. I'm not going to go into the economics too much with this proposal or this research project, but there is a lack of holistic approach that is foundational to Indigenous sciences. And this is why we're going to talk a little bit later about complexity sciences. And that's going to be what I'm looking at. Another thing about grizzly bears, and I'll just touch on this lightly, is we look at grizzly bears as having sort of a number of constraints and challenges that come up against protecting them. So this proposal is really going to be looking at what we call a bottom-up perspective. So when I say bottom-up, it's looking more at their available food resources versus a top-down, which is so the number of roads in an area. Normally, if you go above 0.6 kilometers of roads per square kilometer, you're getting into not good chances for grizzly bear survival. So that would be referred to as a top-down. But we're just, for my project, it's going up. We can't ignore that top-down influence, but this project is really just going to be focusing on the available berry forage, huckleberries and soapberries in the interior. So I'm going to sort of flash in you a lot of maps, and just to give you a little bit more of our situation here. So this is the beautiful province of British Columbia, and you can see that it's broken down into what the province has done. And here's where the Western science has brought some very vital and important information to us. So it's broken down into what we call 55 grizzly bear population units. Now these units aren't, so they're not, even though they've got specific names, they're not genetically unique, although there's 4 or 5 subpopulations, but we're not worrying about that right now. So and this just helps a little bit more with planning. So when you look over on I've got this. When you look over here on the coast, you can sort of see, some areas here on the coast. this is the area here. This was formerly called, I don't know if you can see my, the red area. We've got 4 of these areas in British Columbia that are now considered extirpated. So grizzly bears used to wander throughout the province. Historically, they've always been here. And actually, we do have grizzly bears in this area that I'm kind of honing in on in the central interior. But according to the province, they have dubbed it as being extirpated. So each area, I guess you can see it over to the right. You can sort of see like the red's not good. We're kind of at critical populations to support those, the Garibaldi Pit, the North Cascades, and the Stein-Nahatlatch, and then over to the right. So sorry about the craziness in this slide, but it's just, I don't understand, like you don't need to understand that this was just something that I kind of was playing around with, trying to look at. And I think the reason why I'm flashing this up for you all is to sort of see the complexities of grizzly bears and looking after grizzly bears. So when you look over to left-hand side of the column, I've kind of broken, you can see in the purple font, sort of some of the key grizzly bear critical foods that we're looking at, which is, as I was sort of saying, that more bottom-up influences. So the whole pink on the outside is what all grizzly bears require. They all require large intact landscapes. They require seasonal foods, which is vital for their reproduction. And they need the connectivity between critical habitats. So that's a given, that's what they all need. And then you can see I've slowly started to break it up. So when we look at the coastal mountains to the interior, sort of going a little bit to the right of it, some of the key critical foods are huckleberries and soapberries, red osier dogwood, white bark pine. But over on the coastal side of things, they're a little bit more dependent on the salmon, and because it's more available to them. So all I want you to take away from this lovely, colorful girl, I love colors, girl diagram is just to see that they're complex. Their requirements are very complex, and how do we look after them when there's so many different pressures on the landscape. So my research, I'm going to look at the time again so I don't get too carried away on you all, and I hope I don't lose you all, is looking at what are the states of the forests in my particular study area, or our study area that we're looking at, the grizzly bear population unit. It's a sacrilege I did. I usually don't like to do acronyms without telling you what they actually mean. And what is the science that has been used historically to outline this? So we're going to be looking at the past, present, and future states. So this is really important to move ahead, to really understand what that science is, because we want to find a respectful place, as I was mentioning, on how Indigenous sciences can enhance this. And I will talk more about that as I move forward. So when we look at how settler science has informed all of the decisions that are made at the landscape level, we're going to be really wanting to look at, like, as we move forward, what is the long-term sustainability looking like for grizzly bears? And sort of moving on, and a big component of my research, and I didn't actually say this to you all at the beginning, I'm very early in this. So I'm, again, I'm going to just pause for a minute and, being quite grateful to the Ecological Society of America for this opportunity, because feedback would be wonderful, and just knowledge of, other people that might be doing things like this, or, just their thoughts and perspectives would be really nice. So through community engaged research, so I will be reaching out to the community. And if you remember, we used to call it the duck shape of the Okanagan, the boundaries of the Okanagan Nation territory. I will be reaching out to the Seal Nation members, knowledge holders, and getting a little bit of a better idea on what everything looked like in a past state with respect to grizzly bears, and in a sense, almost mapping on top of the mapping is what the whole idea. So this is going to be like that blue in the middle is going to be the core of where I'm going. So because I haven't engaged yet, and that's coming in the next coming months, what is that going to look like? I don't know if anyone's heard of counter mapping or literary cartography, but sort of enhancing and using yet another map on top of a map to move forward. And really, how will this research contribute to finding, and as I've said, effective and respectful engagement? And I'm going to talk about effective a little bit when we're referring to traditional ecological knowledge. It's almost in the past, it was like, when I first started doing that, it was like searching for the Holy Grail. And I remember so many folks when I was working with genetics and with the Ministry of Forests. Well, I wasn't working in the genetics piece, but I was working alongside some folks, and I remember them really wanting to know, like, what is it, and how can we move forward with it? So here's just another little snapshot of okay, if you remember my super colorful slide on the complexity of what grizzly bears require, you know, everything, these seasonal foods are all vital for their reproduction. So it's not a great, I was just playing around last night. So this is a little bit of where we will be going with some of our mapping. The university has brought someone on to work alongside me who has some really good GIS skills. So this is not his work. This is actually my work, so it's not very good. But I just pulled this from Google Earth, some images in an area in the Okanagan, the grizzly bear area that we're looking at. So you can sort of see as we go through time, obviously there's harvesting that is going on, but so the preferred species for grizzly bears in this area are, I've got the supali, soapberry on the left-hand side, husham berry, and on the right-hand side, I have the huckleberries. So those are the preferred species. But when you look at, you know, the patches and how logging is done, the seral, what we call the seral stages in forestry is vital for, you know, again, the timing of how patches are harvested is most important. And how do we account for that, and how do we look at that? So for example, what we were saying, mid-seral, so we're looking at about you know, harvesting, and then 40 years later would probably be mid-seral, where the trees are starting to come in and they're a little bit more heavy. So mid-seral conifer dominant forests, like 40 to about 100 years, those are suboptimal standards for grizzly bears. So if we've got, you know, harvesting going on and not this coordination between the different licensees on the province, like what does that look like as we move forward? So we'll be taking a little bit of a closer look at that, particularly to the area that I'm going to be looking at. So again, here's another crazy map, so I apologize for this, but there's been some amazing work done by some amazing individuals in British Columbia, and I'm very grateful for the folks that are on my committee, committee, Garth Mowat, done some work with Tony Hamilton, who's been the wildlife large carnivore biologist in this area for a long time. But, you know, they've done some mapping, and this was done in 2018. And these were a couple of maps. This is what my student has created for me. So my focus area is basically this, and that's why, you know, really a big reason of why we're looking at this area. So I'm looking completely west of the Columbia River within that extirpated grizzly bear population unit. And if you remember way back at the beginning of this presentation, I had the 55 grizzly bear population units. You can see here with those white lines, that's narrowed down to 4. We're going to be looking at 4 grizzly bear population units, so we can see what's going on. Because if we're extirpated here in the Okanagan, and like I said, extirpated, we're not extirpated, but if we're looking at that area here, it's really good to sort of see what's going on with those neighboring grizzly bear population units. So this is just some of the work and, you know, the available resources that we have from a Western science, settler science point of view, which is really valuable in moving forward and important as I share with you. So now I'm going to sort of shift a little bit, and I'm going to be talking about these differing worldviews, which are also referred to as when I say a differing worldview, I'm looking at Indigenous knowledge systems and settler science systems. So first and foremost, some of the great work by Adazzi, he's done a lot of work up in the Yukon area. He identified power relations from a science and colonial place and their approaches to the land. So I kind of mentioned at the beginning when I first started talking, it's like the holy grail, like what is traditional ecology? And hey, let's just integrate, let's just blend, let's just weave. And we're moving to a place where I think we've acknowledged that we cannot do that anymore. There's been some really good research done out of, I think it was Australia or New Zealand by Bohensky saying, you know, they reviewed 20 years of research on blending, weaving, integrating traditional knowledge, and there's just no, there's been no like I don't want to say success. There's been it's challenging. I'll just leave it at that. They have really found hard, you know, they were challenged to find hard evidence of how this works, and a lot of that can be related to these power relations and how we see the world differently. So settler science is objective, like we know it's objective. We are, that's how we're taught in school from this place here. And it's exclusive, like it's really not good to talk about your feelings when you're talking about science. And I'm not saying that in a derogatory way. It's very objective, and sometimes it's just easier that way. It's much easier to just look at it that way. Trust me, I've been teaching a sociology class, and it's been really challenging. Much easier to just talk numbers and math and sciences. When we look at traditional ecological knowledge, it's fully inclusive of feeling, of people, relationships. The presentation, sorry, Dan Wildcat from the last seminar spoke about relationships, and I meant to acknowledge that earlier. It was a great presentation. And the sacredness, nature and society are not separated. So we really need to try and shift from that concept of an inclusive decision-making system to a system that can respond to the differing world views. So that's going to be the challenge in the next 2 years for me, and that's critical. So traditional ecological knowledge is often evaluated through the lens of settler science, which also implies superiority over tech. And that is not my quote. You can see it's someone else's quote. So there's a few people that are looking into this, and I'm hoping to add to the discourse on it. So I do want to mention, because I am on, as I've mentioned, the unceded, I better be careful here for timing, on the unceded territory of the Syilx people. Their knowledge and the vehicle that conserves their knowledge, their ecological knowledge, is through their oral traditions of what's termed as Chaptik. Actually, this is a little tidbit for you, Gwen. That was the first time I think I met you, Gwen, when I heard the word Chaptik. So this is straight from another one of my committee members, Jeanette Armstrong, and this is straight from her dissertation, saying that Chaptik informs the Syilx people, their identification of key relations between humans, plants, and the land. It contains essential specific environmental knowledge as an oral documentation mimicking the dynamics of nature's required regenerative principles. So I do have, and I do have some more. So anyhow, so I just holding on to Chaptik. So my research will not be looking so much into interpreting a lot of these oral stories and traditions. It really does need to acknowledge the importance of oral memory and oral stories as they've been handed down. And I will explain more as I move forward with that too. So, so tech is incredibly holistic. Indigenous knowledge systems can, and some do, have that sophisticated understanding of the ecological relationships and dynamics of what goes on the land, and it is transferred from generation to generation. So going back to one of Jeanette's dissertations, so as an example, So best practices for when you're out on the land and you're collecting berries. The women harvesters, and there's actually some huckleberry protector women's groups that are now moving forward with reclaiming a lot of those traditions that they once held. So as an example, they would measure distances between the plants that are going to be harvested. They would determine what size they must be before they harvest them. They would measure how big a patch must be left between patches or plots that were harvested. Alternating fields, very critical. Stopping or drawing from year to year. They would fallow some sections of the plots. They would broadcast discarded seeds. They would also ritual bush beating, shaking the plants after harvesting. Like there were so many things that were tied into after year of acquiring this knowledge that has been handed down from generation to generation. So I'm slowly gonna sort of shift into why we're wanting to look at complexity sciences as possibly a platform where these two distinct and unique knowledge systems can come together. So ecosystems are nested systems that vary spatially and temporally, and really difficult to predict the outcomes of them. And what we do from a Western science, settler science, we tend to simplify ecosystems to manage them. So I'm not dissing in the least at Western science, there's so much there, but just sort of looking, and this is why I want to explore a lot of that initial stuff at the beginning of the mapping work and the serial stages, is to sort of, okay, now, how did we decide that those are the decisions? Because there are some really amazing quantitative tools and techniques from a Western science, but trying to find where we can sort of roll in Indigenous knowledge systems. And as I said, and I'm going to keep saying in a respectful way. So, so that's it. So complexity sciences, and I think my slides are a little bit out of order. Complexity science is a holistic way of moving forward. So how do we address complex issues in a holistic way? Indigenous languages and their understanding of the environment is very precise. So I have another example, and it's Fikret Burks is another amazing person out east. Actually, everyone's amazing, but he's out he's in Manitoba. I think he's at the University of Manitoba, and he did quite a bit of work with the Inuit, actually with many Indigenous groups throughout Canada, and he was talking about taking what he had mentioned was they're very precise in their understanding of the land and their environment. And to the Inuit, in one of his papers, they were saying that that sort of looking at it in a generalized way is a childish way of doing it. Like, you can't do it in that way. Another example is Indigenous knowledge systems are also exact and very precise. And it was one of the first things I learned from one of the knowledge keepers on the Penticton Indian band, when he was telling me. So as an example, in English language, when we say the word jumping, you're just jumping up and down and just trying to find something to, whereas in the Untitled language, when they're saying we're jumping, like, how are you jumping? Are you jumping high? Are you jumping in a forward fashion? Are you jumping in a backward? How are you actually jumping? So Indigenous languages and their understanding of the environment is incredibly precise. So, when looking at that, again, with Jeanette's research, she speaks to the dry interior climates. And when we're looking at berries, again, the windows of harvesting, the exact knowledge of the location where it's just absolutely essential in moving forward. So now I'll kind of talk a little bit about why we're looking at complexity sciences. So how do we continue this discourse or diagram? Like, complexity sciences, we think, and when I say we, it's my supervisor for my PhD is yet another amazing lady, Lael Perrott. She's done quite a bit of work with complexity sciences, and it kind of stemmed from a little bit of the previous and past work that she's done. But we're looking at complexity sciences because it's sort of like non-linear physics is what it is. And I have a little bit to go yet to understand it, but we need to reconceptualize and understand that epistemology of Indigenous sciences and Western sciences to accommodate it in today's decision-making framework. So I'm going to just touch on briefly, I'm going to wrap it up pretty soon here, and I hope I haven't lost you all. I'm probably talking a mile a minute. A significant component of complexity sciences is that they are holistic. We've kind of, you can almost look at complexity sciences from a forestry perspective as we're doing it a little bit in the Great Bear Rainforest through ecosystem-based management, but really there's not been any work that has looked at complexity sciences, Indigenous knowledge, and forestry. But if any of you on the call are thinking, oh, she's wrong, then let me know. So viewing forests as complex systems is relatively newish. I've kind of, no, I didn't have all of their names down. There's a whole slew of amazing other folks out at UBC Vancouver and down in the States, Messier, Pootman, Philotis, and Coates. But forests are integrated socio-ecological systems. So often when we're looking at forestry, we tend to forget that human element, that socio-ecological place. I did have some examples of, you know, of complexity sciences and, you know, heterogeneity, hierarchy, self-organization. So they all share complex system science, all share these common properties. So I may not explore all of those properties, but I may, well, we'll just sort of see how we go once I start engaging with community. So forests are heterogeneous, they're hierarchical, they self-organize. When we think of it, it's a very open system. They adapt, they have memory, they're non-linear, and there's a lot of uncertainty in forests. I've listed the names of, there's a really good paper if you want to know a little bit more about complexity sciences and forestry. I've listed the paper down at the bottom. And I do just have to acknowledge one of my early mentors in the 1990s. It was going to date me, Fred Bunnell, and you know, it always stuck in my mind from 20 years ago. Actually, I might have been lying. It might be a little bit more than 20 years ago when I was in forestry at UBC, but forestry is not rocket science. It is much more complex. So that's just fantastic. And I think I'm kind of coming to the end of my paper. I think this is the last slide. And I know I've forgotten to say a few things to you all, but complexity sciences suggests that a system can be better understood by focusing on the interactions among the various components at the system at multiple scales. So, and I think this is the platform because Indigenous knowledge systems traditionally have embraced at the root of Indigenous knowledge systems, they embrace complexity. And this has just been so often, you know, just not seen when we're looking at forestry. And I'm going to just end in one final thing. And it was, you're maybe familiar with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, looking at the residential schools, and it was Little Child, and it was one of the commissioners who had said right at the very end, there were 94 calls to action for the government to take on. And he said, and that he just was recently quoted as saying this, I wish there was a 95th call to action and that we do it together. So we really do need to move forward together when we're looking at the earth, Mother Earth, the planet, and caring for it. So I'm going to wrap it up there. I'm sorry if I talked too much, but that's where I'm hoping to go in the next 2 years. My research proposal was just approved by the committee. So I can now say I'm a candidate without sort of, I'm kind of a candidate. I'm now a candidate. So that's it. Enough. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Ellen, thank you very much. That was pretty amazing. A lot of information. that was contained in there, and I think begins to illuminate our collective understanding of the challenges that are faced when we think about the requirements for ecological and reinvigoration of traditional management across landscapes. And Grizzly Bear provides that excellent example for how to begin thinking about that within this particular geography in British Columbia and northern Washington state. There's one question that I'll ask in a moment, and I'd invite the participants to write your questions in the question and answer box if you have them. We do have some time to have a discussion with Ellen, and we're fortunate to be able to have this discussion. So one of the questions was, what was the name of the group that did the survey of TEK and settler science initiatives, if you remember referencing that?
Okay, let me go back. So say that again.
You must have referenced mentioned a group had done the survey of tech and settler science.
It was Bohensky. I can actually supply, I can share with you, it was Bohensky. And I can't remember the rest of her team, but I can track that down. Maybe, send me something on the side. That would be great. That would be really good. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll try and see that gets out to the ESA Tech Section membership.
That's a good idea. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I have a question that's really a burning. So we think about ecology, and you really illuminated this well, as sort of thinking it from those objective places and taking a look at various factors, including things like climate, for example. When we think about huckleberries, we think about the factors that impact how huckleberries come to be in the state that they are and which we observe, whether it's through science or otherwise. We have things like climate and substrate and aspect and hydrology and physiology. Yeah. And what you've really described is there's this other layer which not only is independent but wraps those all together and creates sort of a holism within that particular layer, which is the Indigenous management, the actual activities that happen to those huckleberries by a person, which is almost like another layer if we're thinking about expanding ecology to include that and remove some of that. Both be objective and recognizing the subjectiveness within that objective layer, if you will.
That's right.
Sure
yes,
that made sense. But
yep.
And then it's really your research, and this is just to focus the question, is about really diving into that one particular layer and bringing out from the community those particular components of ecological management, which would form that layer, which then we could all analyze within the context of that broader set of components which make up ecology, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And Gwen, we're so on the same page, and I love when we can talk. But you're absolutely right. It's sort of bringing in that other layer. And as I said, because I'm so early in all of this, and I may just sort of tease out a couple of those components of complexity sciences to see where that can fit in there. Something else that I did mention, and I may be sort of skirting off on a tangent, but something else that I will be looking at is, it's well recognized by Lou, and he's someone out of the States as well, looking at coupled human and natural systems. And again, a lot of the research that I've read on what they call CHANs is, not a lot of Indigenous ways of knowing have been brought into this, but really looking at that and exactly as you've addressed, like that interaction, that sociological interaction. I was on a call yesterday all day, and we had a climate change modeler come in from the province of British Columbia, and again, I put up my hand and said, again, when you're modeling for climate change, and some really great stuff is coming out, but do you model and integrate a little bit of that human component? And no, not, but it is a big piece of it, and incredibly complex. And I'm still trying to wrap my head around a lot of it. But thank you, Gwen. Yeah.
Great. And a couple more questions related to, I suppose, this concept of building that holistic ecology. Do human ecological concepts such as sense of place and place attachment play a role in your research? You talked about relationships, but this place-based stuff.
Yeah, they definitely will. And where we're going to find that is, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And which we do see missing when we're looking at the work that is done on the land and moving forward. And, what is that going to look like and where can it fit in? But yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. And now a couple questions which are education related, one sort of more top down, one bottom up. I'll approach the top down question first. And then
Sure.
Sally, I see there's a hand up from you. What are your thoughts on Indigenous folks like yourself, and I include myself and others, having to have settler science degrees? For example, we both have Masters of Science. You're getting your PhD in order to be heard or taken seriously.
Okay, I might have missed a key word in there. Can you just say it again?
Yeah. What are your thoughts on Indigenous folks having to have settler science degrees in order to be heard or taken seriously?
That's a really, really good question. And, and thank you for that question. And I think it's always, and you can even answer this and help me out there too, Gwen. I think there's a huge challenge there. There's some other really good work, and I don't know if Kovac talking, and there's a lot of publications out there like Linda Tuwali-Smith about Indigenous research methodologies and how do we look at that. I guess for me, and I can just sort of speak for myself, being raised in a non-Indigenous setting and environment, maybe I almost sort of feel like I'm not able to answer it in a way that would be respectful to other Indigenous peoples, because I was raised in that very settler science place. But over the years of sort of working closely with a lot of Indigenous academic scholars, I know it can be a little bit of a contentious issue, and I think that's sort of something as we move forward to be aware of and respect. It's yeah. Gwen, I don't know if you had anything to add to that.
I think what having a Master's of Science or a science-based education as an Indigenous person enables is just to be able to have conversations which you understand. So we understand science-based communications, and that's really important to be able to have conversations which would then be able to influence the lexicon or nuance of science and science interpretation. So just like that. And then another question, which is sort of following up from the bottom, is this comment from Gail. I'm so excited by the concept of this cross-pollination of knowledge. I'm curious whether you see a future where public school curriculum in our country, starting in elementary school, will teach both systems in terms of how we humans relate to the world. Brilliant question. Thank you for that, because that's exactly where it starts. And when we think about Indigenous knowledge systems and, pre-settler, pre-colonial times, it was, there's a big piece of that is so absent in it. And I did quite a bit of work too with helping design some curriculum. And actually that is, like I said, a very good question, helping design curriculum for, they did a big revamp of the curriculum in British Columbia, and it was really bringing in that Indigenous science in a unified way across the province from an Indigenous perspective. But there's still so much that is missing. But that's in the sociology course that I'm teaching, that's the key. That is exactly the key. It is, and I'm sorry, I kind of went off on a tangent, but I hope that kind of, but I do see a place. The place is actually, I think BC is, we're doing some great things in some other areas, and we just need a little bit of a nudge to do it in this way or that way. But yeah, the education piece, it's happening here, and I think it's going to keep moving forward with the United Nations, with UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, the adoption of the act in our province and in Canada. And I know you're doing some great things in the States. I'm sorry for being so Canada-centric here, but I know you're doing some great things, especially when it comes to forestry, because I think in forestry in the States, from what I understand, you do account for that human component a little bit more than we do here in BC. So I might be coming and knocking at your door at the 49th a little bit. There is one more point I would make for those of you who are interested in education. That is our chairperson, James Radlingleaf, the chair of the ESA Tech section, has informed us that in Rapid City there will be a school, an elementary school, which is going to be teaching all in Lakota. And so his question to us was to think about well, what, when they teach science in Lakota, how will that be different? What will be different about that type of education? So there is a lot of movement and in that way, so I don't know what that school is called, but for those of you interested in that education component, know that. That's really exciting. Sally, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, thank you.
Nice.
Hi. This is a great question. It'll be really interesting to see how your research evolves. I had a question on how you, if you could elaborate a little more about how you focused your research question based on the forest complexity issue, and also what you felt would be able to be informed by TEK in terms of, like, you focused on the food source in particular, and was there any thinking about kind of healthy habitat and what that incorporates, or can you, I know you're trying to balance like 3 different big systems.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Yeah. And no, that's a great question. And I kind of missed out on that too. You know, obviously with traditional ecological knowledge, as I think most people on the call know, it's very, very specific to a certain area or a certain group. So yeah, obviously as this kind of plays out, it will just be in this area. And now I've kind of gone off with your question, but and you also touched on something else too when you sort of read through my proposal. It, you know, I'm tackling some pretty big areas, and you know, I'm kind of hoping I'm not sort of setting myself up for a little bit of a storm to sort of see where it all lands and where it all goes. But so you were just sort of asking, like, and I think that's exactly your question, Sally. And I don't know if I don't even think I'm answering your question properly, but that is exactly it. Like, where does it, I'm not quite sure until I really am able to engage with community to sort of see how that might work. I'm really only drawing from a lot of the published work that has been done so far from Jeanette Armstrong and the research that she did with her dissertation. You might have to, I don't think I answered your question. I'm sorry, Sally.
No, I think you did. You know, and I think that's a challenge with designing research questions, because you need to know more than you already know in order to design the question, which means it has to go through iteration. So I understand
that's right. That's right. So actually, when I first submitted my proposal and my research questions, that, you know, the first thing that it was Jeanette who came back to me and said, Ellen, I think you need to sort of understand a little bit more of the science that is used to, you know, that is making these landscape level decisions in the province right now. And so that we know where we might be able to intersect. And as I was sort of saying, you know, bring forward, you know, maybe a little bit more like, how can that preciseness be applied? And I don't know yet, but very good question. And it was, yeah, like I said, I'm kind of tackling this from 3 very wide-spanning areas. And I think another one too was, and it was something that was said at the last week's seminar, was, you know, it's so easy to, is it sing to the choir or preach to the choir? One of those, you know, like, and when I was teaching in that sociology class, like, you know, it's really, I saw it was like very different thought processes that are coming together. So it was, yeah.
Well,
thank you.
Yeah, good luck with it. Great to see a more integrative approach.
Thank you, Sally.
Yeah.
That's it, Sally Ann. Thank you, Sally Ann. Yeah.
And on the question of integration, there's a couple of questions here, which maybe I'll try and wrap into one, but there's this really interesting point you made about the lack of evidence that this integration between settler science and TAK can be done effectively. There's this this conceptual framework that's emerging in Canada called ethical space. And one of those ideas about the application of ethical space is, as we have better relationships for navigating this gap or bridging the gap between these 2 knowledge systems, are there examples where this has worked really well to from your experience?
Yeah. So this is actually, and that's again, this is sort of like, whoo, I can just sort of put that one aside. So part of my research will be designing this conceptual framework where I'm really going to delve into looking at Indigenous knowledge systems. And I'm going to look at it from a global perspective and see if there has been any really solid situations of it actually working, and what does that look like. So a really good question, but so I will sort of build moving forward, like I was sort of saying, with this conceptual framework of looking at Indigenous knowledge systems. So this is not going to be any of my community engagement research. It's just really doing a pretty discursive, like, literature review of Indigenous knowledge systems and complexity system science and the coupled human and natural systems. And sort of, I know it's really widespreading right now, but it may, once I really hunker down, as soon as this call's over, I'm going to get to work. but yeah, so that's really good question. So I don't know yet, but I hope to kind of take it a little bit further than that one paper that I'm aware of. Yeah.
For sure. And there was another question about if you could speak a little bit more about the methods you'll be using to collect your research data. I don't know, you've just talked about some of those challenges and that you're in this beginning process, but if there's anything that you'd want to add to that, that would be great.
Yeah. So yeah, and the methods is going, the methodology piece. Well, I'll be doing semi-structured interviews, and again, it will be following all protocols of free, prior, and informed consent, looking at the ownership, control, access, and possession in Canada, the OCAP guidelines that are laid out. I'm probably going off on a tangent here, but it will definitely be one-on-one, and I'm not wanting to take advantage of my situation of, as I was sort of saying, being working here on the Okanagan territory. But very grateful for the relationships that I've formed over the years. It's and being immersed in community, and like it is like I feel like I'm sometimes at home when I'm driving through the reserve or heading down to the Kiʔlawnaʔ, Okanagan, or the Lower Similkameen area. But some wonderful people that are here and in the Merritt area as well, where I teach at the college there.
There's another interesting question too about the knowledge systems transmission, really. So we have settler science, which has come over in a colonial sense to Canada and informed the way that we're all looking at the world. And this question is about, well, in those areas like Europe, for example, where some of this TEK may be missing, do you think that there could be application for sort of a reverse migration of this type of thinking about natural systems and what TEK might mean more globally, for example, in Europe?
Yeah, well, and when we think of Europe, I always sort of, I guess I'm kind of reminded of the work that a good friend of mine does with the Forest Stewardship Council, and he's part of the Indigenous knowledge cluster there. And, it was with the frustration from the Sami people and the reindeer herds and the wind turbines, because and I'm probably, once again, the joy of Zoom, you can avoid or kind of the questions and maybe not quite answer it right. I should listen a little bit more, but I remember him sort of acknowledging like how that was really messing up a lot of the migrating reindeer and things like that need to be addressed, because there's still a lot of great work that does go on in that Eurocentric kind of place. But I didn't do well answering that question. I'm sorry. Like, actually, I should have just left. And if I can, I'd be very happy to share my email if anyone has any questions, or if they wanted to add to the dialogue. That would be really nice, because I have a feeling sometimes too, I hear, I like to think I hear what I'm hearing, and then I just kind of off I go, okay, bye. Okay. But
that's great, Ellen. If you want to drop that in the chat, if you're communication, your email in the chat would be great. We are coming up to time, so I wanted to just take a moment to thank the audience for listening and for participating in our webinar series, and for asking Ellen some great questions. I want to thank Ellen for taking the time to share this really exciting work, which I think will really have implications that are important to all of us working in ecology and land management. So thanks for that. We look forward to hearing updates from you as you go along and your new findings and your conclusions when you're done. So really appreciate that. On behalf of the ESA Tech section, I want to make sure that all of you are aware that we're having our next webinar speaker on Friday, July 23rd, again at the same time. And this is from Mrs. Kiʔlawnaʔ, who is from the University of, or Northern Arizona University, speaking to us about the guidelines for the use of traditional knowledge. So it's really a nice lead on to what Ellen's talked about in terms of her research. And then gathering that knowledge, Ellen talked a lot about the gathering of the knowledge, and then moving into the application and the implementation of these knowledge systems within our broader scientific and ecological context. So please do make yourselves available for that, all of the ESA participants. And just want to again say thank you so much, everybody, for being with us. And it's time now. And thanks to Ellen, and thanks to ESA Tech for creating this series, and our chairperson, James Radlingleaf, who was unfortunately unable to make it because of internet issues. So, I think that kind of wraps
you, everyone.
it. Thank you. Thanks, Ellen.
And please email me. Because I'm looking for feedback too. So thank you very, very much. Limlint. Okay. Thank you, Glenn. All right. Thank you, Sally. Okay.